In this project, we are 4 principal investigators, and we represent 4 fields that we bring with us into the study of book fragments. I study old script. Tuomas in Helsinki is a medieval church historian. Matthew in Copenhagen is a parchment expert, and Lars in Odense is a literary historian. So we all have our different perspectives and strengths. And with us, we have a great team, which is constantly growing, and we are grateful to have with us very clever people that this project depends on. So that's the framework of the project. Manuscript books are a material and tangible link to the past, carriers of information from one place and time to another. Books are sources to literary texts, historical information, liturgy, music, saints' cults, but also art history, craft, and trade. Like all handmade things, every medieval book is unique, shaped by the individuals who made them. If they are kept in good condition, like the wonderful manuscript of Jerome kept in the University Library here in Bergen, they share a lot of information. The manuscript you see on your screen is complete with illuminated initials, the original leather binding, and even a colophon, a written remark at the end with the name of the scribe, as well as the place and time in which he wrote, which was a Cistercian monastery in current-day Belgium in the year 1200. What more can we ask for? But this level of information is rare. Contrary to what one might instinctively think, a medieval manuscript is actually not brittle. It was made to last forever. If handled and kept well, it will last for 1,000 years easily. The pages of Carolingian manuscripts in the Vatican Library, they have bright colors on fresh-looking white parchment, even though they were made 1,200 years ago. Estimates claim that European collections hold about 750,000 medieval manuscripts, many of which are in Latin, but also a good portion in different vernaculars. Losses are, however, substantial. In spite of their solid constitution, the large majority of medieval manuscripts are lost. The causes are varied, but most losses are either accidental, like fires and shipwrecks, or pragmatic reuse through later times' lack of interest in their content. Several studies into the loss rates of medieval manuscripts, whether they study Latin or Old Norse or other vernacular manuscripts, have loss estimates of well over 90%, which means that the manuscripts we hold today constitute less than 10% of the manuscripts produced. This is worth keeping in mind when evaluating the evidence. However, there is hope. Between the books lost and those preserved are the ones partially preserved as fragments. In the Nordic region, these book fragments are mainly transmitted as binding material on archival papers from the 16th and 17th century. The numbers are substantial, but that is not necessarily what makes these collections extraordinary. What is special about the Nordic fragment collections is, for one, that the books are to a certain degree reconstructible, owing to their relatively systematic reuse by the royal administrations of in the early modern kingdoms of Denmark, including Norway and Iceland, and Sweden, including Finland. Most fragments are from liturgical books, with texts, songs, and prayers for the celebration of Mass and office, but there's also theological literature, law books, legends, and other works. Fragments in our collections also constitute evidence of the northernmost reach of a text. In addition, there is also their high importance as sources to the literary development of an entire region. As noted by English paleographer Michael Gullick, the Nordic region is one of the rare cases where you can see the introduction of Latin literacy from scratch. Finally, these fragments may be seen as sources to the development of ecclesiastical organization, saints' cults, monasticism, and the inclusion of the North into learned networks of medieval Europe, as we are intending to look more closely into over the next 6 years. What was clear already in the 1970s was that there had been some moving around of the fragment material in the North, in addition to moving borders between the Nordic countries. It is quite clear that this material cannot be studied within the confines of national borders. In our case, it had to be studied on a Nordic level, but with a wider international perspective. The fragments are not equally distributed. The Swedes dominate with 22,700 large fragments. They are often bifolia. The Norwegian ones, about 6,000, they are often small. But for Norway and for the Latin material, this is what we have. The manuscripts, they are almost all gone, with the exception of about 10 to 12 books that we know were used in Norway in the Middle Ages. So the surviving Latin manuscripts from Norway, you could take with you on a carry-on bag on an airplane. So for a wider impression of the Latin cultural heritage, the fragments are it. Sweden and Denmark, they have large manuscript collections with roots into medieval times. They hold nearly 1,000 books each. And Iceland have their wonderful collection of Icelandic Norse literature. Finland, they are a little more like us. We do depend on the fragments. The numbers of lost and preserved books for the Nordic region can be illustrated like this. AI tells me that these circles represent the relationship between the estimated numbers. But if we include the books represented by fragments, it looks slightly better. It also tells us that the majority of Latin manuscripts transmitted to us, here these represented with the orange or pinkish circle, they are actually fragmentary or broken. And they are represented by between 1 and about 70, 80 fragments in the most fortunate cases. And these then become of vital importance. With these numbers, we have estimated about a 3% survival rate rather than the 7 or 8% survival rates of the rest of Europe, based on the numbers of churches and institutions. Hopefully in 6 years, we will know a little bit more about these numbers and the current estimates. The gigantic jigsaw puzzle, that is what it is, namely. The task of piecing the books together has been ongoing for 100 years and is still ongoing, in parallel with research on specific aspects or groups of fragments. And we've always felt that we are being interdisciplinary. But it is a low and familiar level of interdisciplinarity. Our perspectives, approaches, and historical outlook, they are very similar. Still, these are essential skills for the identification and the reunification of the fragmented books. I will show you some examples of the kinds of fragments we have been working with and move from there to the other types of interdisciplinary collaboration that we are now embarking on. There are some examples in the North of fragments being physically reassembled, such as this English missal in the Royal Library in Stockholm. It consists of a number of fragments from archival bindings, as you can tell from the archival inscription on the right-hand side here. But for the last 30 years, people have been looking towards digital technology for reassembly. This is, of course, connected to the developments in the the 1990s when manuscripts were digitized. Early manuscripts at Oxford, for example, started in 1995. In 1998, we were all stunned when the British Library came with a new innovation. It was called turning the pages. On a big box, we were allowed to turn the pages of selected manuscripts in the lobby of the British Library without even getting a library card. Fantastic. The first manuscript out was the iconic Lindisfarne Gospel. Other books followed, and you could even purchase them on a CD-ROM. The purpose was, as the picture illustrates, to give people the illusion of leafing through the real manuscript. This was an initiative that put more focus on the use of so-called digital surrogates. But initiatives such as these also made the awareness arise that this was an illusion. What we were watching was not the manuscript, but combinations of zeros and ones that could not really replace the physical object itself. Still, the advantages of digital reproduction was just too huge on many levels. And the development goes quickly. 10 years went by, and this type of software was used for retail catalogs and easily available. So 10 years ago, we put some test cases out online thinking this would be perfect for fragments. This is one of the first books we assembled in 2015, and that was based already then on 10 to 15 years of identification work. As you can see, it's not so easy to study this manuscript in detail, and you can already see from what I've said here is that many of these fragments are the small Norwegian fragments. But we see enough to see that the saints, those saints present, which are not universal, they are connected to places in Flanders and northern France. And also the fragments were divided on 4 different countries, several different collections, and seen together, it seemed like the fragments had originated in Denmark, so it was presumably a manuscript used in Denmark. So was the book made there and imported to Denmark? Was it in Flanders? Was it a Danish-made copy, perhaps? That would be interesting to know. But how could we? Normally, the script or the hand of the scribe would be the way to tell. But what we can tell is where the scribe was trained, not where he actually worked. And this is what we would look at, the details of the script. So here we see some details of the Legendarium Flandrense, the book we just saw, up close. These are details from 2 different fragments in 2 different collections. And we see that the scribe writes an even script, and he's quite recognizable. When you've seen him once, you recognize him across collections. And you can see some of the features used in the identification, fairly similar, and all of them features pointing to a scribe trained in Flanders or northern France. But as mentioned, whether he traveled to Denmark and wrote there, that is something that we, until now, had no way of finding out. We shall look at some more examples and move over to Britain. So we crossed the channel for our next example of the kind of book found in Nordic collections. Winchester scribes are represented among the Norwegian book fragments in imported books. And these include scribes from the New Minster as well as the Old Minster in Winchester. The small missal to the left has even been identified as the scribe Elfsiger by Michael Gullick. There are also other English scribes from unidentified ecclesiastical centers. I'm currently working on a fragment at the moment, which I believe is from a book made in Durham, but I don't know. I cannot be sure. History tells us that there has been a lot of traffic across the North Sea, which involved both people and books. and other types of trade, such travels are visible in these sources. There are several examples of English or English-looking books, like these two book fragments from Sogn in Western Norway, for example. And I apologize, they're a little bit small, but the script to the left, from in the missal to the left, is interpreted as imitating English script, but identified as very early Norwegian-made book. The one on the right was clearly English trained, writing on good English parchment. But in the Nordic collections, we also have a combination that English experts say you don't find in English books, namely good English trained scribes writing on poor parchment. That apparently is very unusual. When we find such fragments, does that mean that an English scribe was writing on Norway on locally made parchment? The parchment itself may be able to tell us that. So by supplementing analysis of script with analysis of parchment, we can move beyond what paleography and script can provide and get closer to the centers people had contact with, traveling scribes working in Scandinavia. So through parchment, we can move beyond the categories import or imitation and towards interaction or collaboration. And that's when it starts to become really interesting for us. The modern era has opened up new areas of research which, like the digital development, contributes to a certain leveling of the field between fragments and manuscripts, namely what is often referred to as heritage science. The methods recently developed are non-invasive or micro-invasive, which make them applicable on a broader scale. No physical samples need to be cut from the artifact or book. Conservators tend to be unhappy if people suggest cutting in things. So like in modern forensics, the samples needed are microscopic. First of all, a book is biological material. In the Middle Ages, books were made from parchment, which was crafted from the skin of dead animals. And parchment was dominant as writing material in Europe in the Middle Ages. As a teacher of mine once said, "Remember, a book is a dead cow." Little did I know the significance of that statement at the time. The fact that the books were made from biological material opens up a range of possibilities for analysis. There are proteins, lipids, DNA, bacteria, and virus. And apparently what makes parchment analysts most excited these days are diseases like pox. The fragments we have just looked at represent books which each consisted of hundreds of animals taken from herds in the vicinity of where they were made. While the preferred animals in the south of Europe were sheep and goat, the north, including Britain, is dominated by calfskin. The environment of these animals, they leave measurable traces in the skin, like information about diet and rainfall. So a legendary like the one we just looked at, originally covering multiple volumes, about 1,000 leaves, would need about 500 calves in order to be made. So parchment is a significant key for us in the CODICUM project. So we are incredibly lucky to have both Matthew Collins and the Copenhagen parchment expert Jiří Vnarček as integral members of the team. Jiří has for years explored techniques of making parchment, how the animal skins respond to different treatments. For example, why is Icelandic parchment so different from parchment made in other places? The only way to really find out is to try to replicate the methods in Icelandic conditions, which can be both smelly and cold experience. But Jiří has tried. And what can you read from parchment? what is the potential? There is the animal species from which the parchment was made. That can be read from the protein. And for example, in the Nordic collections, if there is a sheep or a goat among all the calves, we know that we need to take an extra look. There are related pieces of parchment from DNA, which can be compared across samples. Also parchment, they form identifiable populations of cattle, allowing scholars to almost postcode the origin of a book using DNA. In the illustration to the left, you see that's Matthew Teasdale, who's looked at a Northumbrian book and found its population right where he expected it in Northumbria. There is the environment, the diet, and the diseases of the animal, from the lipids, bacteria, virus. And bacteria and virus, they have their own DNA, so there's even more possibilities for post-coding of the parchment. And there is also the materials and the techniques used in the making of the parchment. For example, access to salt or access to lime. The hope is that we can do different types of tests on different fragments, which will be analyzed using mass spectrometry. Some samples will be prioritized for DNA and isotopes that can lead us to the place where the calf grew up, which will probably be close to where the parchment was made and the book was written. And this is when it really starts to get interesting. Was the calf Danish, French, Flemish, or English, or perhaps Scottish? Now we cannot just ask the questions, but we have a fair chance of getting an answer. As you just saw, the script can only take us so far, but when we combine with parchment, we can get much further. And we have many groups of fragments where a place of origin would bring us closer to a historical context. And the interest of working interdisciplinary is that you're working alongside people where you actually have no clue what they are talking about. You can just trust that they know what they are doing. I just included in the slide a quote from the project application. I will never be able to fully understand the science behind it, but I'm happy and confident to trust my colleagues on this. And the sampling has just started in Stockholm this month, actually. And the method, which was developed in New York by Sarah Fidement on the Beasts of Craft project, led by Matthew Collins, is to lightly brush the parchment with a little Q-tip-like thing. So the samples are microscopic and not much more than would actually come off with normal use. And you can see the historian Thomas trying the method himself together with a team of conservators. And as you can tell from photographic evidence, the results were very promising. So we are at the moment purchasing some fairly costly machinery for the analysis, and we hope to be able to share results with you in the near future. So please follow our progress on www.codicum.eu, and perhaps we even find a Scottish calf or two. That would be very interesting. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Åslaug. That was really fascinating. I was quite surprised actually by the numbers of fragments in places like in Sweden and Finland. That was quite interesting actually. As someone who often looks at Norse texts, you know, we focus entirely on the Icelandic material, and yeah, it's interesting to see the amount available in Sweden and Finland.
Yeah, so suddenly the numbers are kind of completely tilted.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when it comes to the, as you could see from the the graph, the number of Latin fragments in Iceland are surprisingly low, and it seems that that there was not the same practice of reusing the books on accounts and protocols in 16th and 17th century Iceland. So the Icelandic Latin Icelandic parchment fragments that we have are mainly they come from bindings. Many of them, I mean, book bindings from Árni Magnússon's books. So the Icelandic ones, they have a slightly different history, but we find Icelandic scribes in the Latin material, also in the Norwegian material, for example, and in the Swedish and Danish as well. So if there's anything that we can tell from it, is that books really moved around, and probably scribes. Well, we know scribes did as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was wondering, how precise can you get with identifying the herd from which an animal whose skin has been used to make the manuscript? Can you say this is probably from Northern England, or it's
Well, the people who know more than me, they say yes.
okay?
Yeah, that it's supposed to be possible, and in terms of Norway, for example, we tend to look towards Britain because we know that there was so much contact, and also English books they have been studied for a long time and are easily recognizable. And England is also the place where there has been the most mapping of the parchment, so it's easier to tell there. Since this is very new in Scandinavia and the Nordic region, we don't have reference material yet. So there will be it will be a few years, I guess, of building up also reference material, where other types of documents will be quite important, like like the documents or diplomas, where you would have diplomas that have a date and a place on them, which will be of great help to build up sort of a reference database.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Oh, I see. We have
Is there something in the chat that we?
Yes, something coming in from Leslie Abrams. Says, has there been more information about, or a change in ideas about, where the first churchmen came from who brought Christianity to different Scandinavian regions, or are the fragments from a later period?
No. It's a nice question. Thank you. Because the fragments are the oldest ones are from the 9th century. So you have the example of the insular square minuscule in the oldest fragment, which is paired with a continental Caroline minuscule at the same time, and then you have the 11th century when it really starts to the numbers start to grow, and it is quite clear that the influences or the impulses, they came from many places. So if you look at the 11th century fragments, I know best the Norwegian material. I hope that will change in the course of the project, but we have about 50 books from the 11th century, and less than half of those are English. So more than half are from elsewhere, from German-speaking areas, from France and Flanders. But these are more difficult to relate to. So there has been a kind of a skewed impression because the English material is easier to deal with than the continental material. But we haven't yet found any very I mean, we know that from the Baltics, for example, we haven't seen anything that isn't the Latin West, so to speak. I don't think that that's the case in Sweden and Finland either. But there is a different distribution. So the Norwegian material does have more English. The Swedish material seemed to be more sort of German. That the Christianity came from the south. But we are hoping to shed some more light on that as well, and especially that we are aware that we can't just look at the things that look familiar. We have to start tackling those things that we have no idea where they come from, really.
I see that Leslie says thank you for that answer, and also she's asking where is that 9th century one from, if you know.
Well, one is we just I don't know where in England. The other one is sort of, was it southern Germany or something like that?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I see another question here.
Yeah.
Is there any information on the analysis of inks from that period? Yeah, ink is one of the things that people have started to analyze with good results. At the location of the script, yeah, we assume that inks would have been made locally. In some cases, with imported raw material. I mean, if not all places are blessed with lots of oak, for example, if you wanted to make oak galls, and again we see Icelandic recipe for ink must be different from the rest. So it has to do with the material, with the natural resources as well. But we haven't yet planned to analyze ink. Pigments they actually come first with some pilot studies being done.
Okay. I see John Hunter asks, says animal skin needs to be thoroughly dried before it can be used. Doesn't that process destroy the DNA? He's asking.
Again, they tell us no.
Yeah.
So what we don't know is that some of the fragments have been treated. I mean, in conservation processes, and some of them are also burnt, as you saw from, there was a big fire in Stockholm. So many of the fragments there also are burnt and damaged. And that is one of the things that they were testing in Stockholm, where on a page do you sample to have the best chance of a good result. So they are trying to test, but apparently the DNA isn't too, and also the protein is sort of the key thing as well in many of the tests. So so they tell us it's, yeah, we have good hopes, but also we won't have 100% success rate. So we'll see what happens.
It sounds like there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, though.
We certainly
Yeah.
are at the moment. Yeah.
And Ed Moore says, thanks for a great presentation. What will be the approach when you do find parchment, if it comes from abroad? Could the parchment itself be transported rather than the finished manuscript itself? And
Yeah.
Ed also says, good luck with the rest of the project.
Thank you, Ed. That is one thing that we cannot rule out, that there could have been imported parchment. We don't know, but we can't rule it out. So the cases where we kind of methodologically can be on safest ground is when we find sort of Scandinavian parchment. If we, in those cases, like those really suspicious cases that I mentioned with very good English scribe writing on very thick, sort of poorly made parchment, then there is a much higher chance that it's a good English scribe that has traveled and writing on local parchment rather than anyone in England importing poor Norwegian parchment. So in those cases, we can be fairly certain. If everything else is high quality and the parchment is, there's nothing else that would make us suspicious, and the parchment is from somewhere else, then it could be imported parchment. So those kinds of things we'll have to deal with on a case by case, in a case by case sort of situation.
And Ed says thank you. And there's a couple of other thank yous in the chat as well, I see. So I don't believe there are any more questions.
We try to be visible, so please look up the website CODICUM.eu, and you have to put the 3 W's in front, I think, to get to the right place. So we are updating it with the news of the progress there, and some more information about the people involved and what we are doing. So as the results start to come, they will also be presented there first.
That's great.
Oh, there it is.
Thank you, Selma.
I was hoping that was the right one.
Yes,
I think it is.
that should be the right one. Yeah.
Thank you once again, Åslaug. And
Yep.
There is one more question just came in. You are based in Bergen. I often visit there. This is from Alison Reef. Is there anywhere I would be able to see these types of manuscripts displayed in a museum or at the university?
Well, the university library here, they have a nice special collection with different types of material, and they have an arrangement with the museum at Bryggen. So there's always something on display at Bryggen from the special collections at the university as well. So I would recommend a visit to the museum at Bryggen in any case. And but we there is also but the main bulk of the Norwegian material is in Oslo.
Okay. Ed Moore has just one other quick question. Will the project utilize any multispectral imaging techniques?
I assume that there will be more add-ons where we will use different types of methods and techniques, but the kind of the core of it is the parchment, and then we will see where the science and technology takes us over the next few years.
Brilliant. Well, thank you once again, Åslaug, and I think we'll let you go now. And
yes, that was amazing. Thank you very much.
That was brilliant.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye-bye.